Hi everyone, hopefully everyone can see and hear me okay. Thank you so much for joining us for the webinar to share the findings of the state of period equity in the UK. Beautifully put up timed there with the slide. Really want to just welcome everyone. And I'm Charlotte. I'm going to be kind of taking us through the session today. We've got loads of great speakers to share their stories and their thoughts with you as well. But I'm Charlotte, the Partnerships and Impact Director at In-Kind Direct. And I just want to really touch on how timely this feels. Last month, we saw the VAT on period underwear being scrapped. This month is Endometriosis Action Month, and this Friday is International Women's Day. And I also just wanted to pause and share. I mean, I'm so proud of all the work that In-Kind Direct does, but this particular project is personal for me. I live with a number of menstrual health conditions, and over my life, it's meant time out of school. It's meant a long road to getting the diagnosis and care that I need, and days where I either couldn't work or where I felt a pressure to just get on with it anyway. And when I think about my life, I've had the financial stability, a great support network, and access to products, and it's still been tough. So the stories that we'll hear today will highlight why urgent action is needed to ensure that everyone has access to the products, the education, and that shame-free support so that no one is held back by their period. I'd love to ask anyone that's joined us today, we've already got a great number of people with us, to introduce yourself in the chat, let us know who you are, and if you want to join the conversation on social media, we really ask that you use the hashtag #StateOfPeriodEquity. And a bit of housekeeping just to get us going. If anyone would like to see captions, because we're in Teams, you'll need to turn that on by clicking More on the menu at the top of the screen, then Languages and Speech, and turn on live captions. And I believe my colleague Katie is going to be popping those instructions into the chat as well. Because we've got a number of people on the call with us, we'd ask if you're not speaking, if you could put your mic on mute, just to avoid any background noise coming through. We're recording today's session, and we're planning to put the recording and the presentation slides that you'll see throughout onto our website shortly afterwards. We ask if you've got any questions, please do put them in the chat, and if we don't get to them as we're going along, we will pick them up in the panel conversation towards the end. And just to give you a quick run through what we're going to be covering today, I'm going to give you a couple of slides and a bit of an update on who In-Kind Direct are and why we've commissioned this research. Then we're going to be hearing from Neelam Hira at Sisters and Tara, who have lived experience to share or work with communities who are dealing with period inequity. Then we're going to be hearing from Celeste, the Policy and Research Manager at In-Kind Direct, on the key findings and recommendations from the report. Then we're going to have a section from Gareth, who's our partner at Essity, and speaking about why Essity have been involved and also his personal connection to the work we've been doing. And then we're going to hear from Emily, who's been one of our key charity partners at iRise International. And then we're going to end up with a panel conversation where we'll have Emily, Neelam and Caroline from All Yours Period Box, who's one of our network partners. We will be able to answer a few more questions. So just to kick off, we're going to go through the slides and I'll give you a bit of a lowdown on In-Kind Direct. So if we just want to bring up the information that's on the slide, that'd be great. I think we can bring it all up. So at In-Kind Direct, we believe everyone deserves access to life's essentials and no usable product should go to waste. And that's really been the belief that guides our work for the 26 years that we've been around. We were set up by the then Prince of Wales, now King Charles. And this is really kind of the belief that guides us in what we do. So practically, just ping back a little bit to the previous slide. Practically what this means is we connect companies and communities, and that means getting access to the products that people need and also enabling an amazing local network of over 6,000 charities and community groups to really stretch their own resources, support more people in challenging times and do more for less. So we have a bit of a dual role. We are a practical response, alleviating immediate need through product distribution across the UK, making sure everyone can access those essentials. But we also recognise that if that's all we do, then the number of people who are relying on us is probably only going to grow. So that real need to push for systemic change and understand those real underlying reasons why people are reliant on a service like ours in the first place is really key. So the way we work is in 4 key ways, as I've mentioned. Product distribution, getting those essentials from A to B out to communities who need them, working with amazing companies, manufacturers and retailers who donate those products to us. Commissioning new research, like the research we're here to talk about today, which leads to public campaigns so we can really raise awareness and reduce the stigma around a lot of social issue causes that are covered in that next row down. And then also, we are real firm believers that no one can do this by themselves. So we believe really strongly in partnership and working across sectors, so corporate, public and civil society, to achieve real change. And just to give you a taste at the bottom, those little orange boxes, I won't run through them all, but that's just an example of some of our impact to date. So in 26 years, you can see the scale of the difference we've been able to make. And if I move us on to the next slide, just to focus in particularly on the state of period equity research that we're here to talk about. This is just a real flavour of why In-Kind Direct has been leading this work. So in 2022, we issued a groundbreaking report, Human Right to Hygiene, which really mapped out all of those underlying causes why people find themselves or are forced into hygiene poverty. And within that work, we set out a roadmap to change, which had some really big ambitions, working across sectors to fill national data gaps. And as I've said, increase awareness and reduce that shame and stigma that sadly so many people are feeling. And when we talk about hygiene poverty, that includes period inequity. And just to give that sense of period inequity is not having access to the products, the education and that support that anyone deserves to be able to manage their period well. So then when we look at the work that In-Kind Direct does, we believe in supporting communities. And we know from across our network, period products are one of the most needed products. And so when we set out our strategy and we think about the work that we do, it is always shaped by the local insight of our charitable network and the people that they support every day. So that's why we've brought together a phenomenal advisory group to lead on this work. If we can move to the next slide. So the report itself had a number of objectives. And as I've touched on there, we've got that definition that we work to of what period equity is. So it's having the products, facilities and healthcare, the education for everyone, not just those who have periods, and that freedom from stigma and discrimination so that everyone has access to all the choices that they should be able to be making. So the research has some pretty lofty aims. We were looking to demonstrate the scale of period inequity in the UK. There's been lots of surveys and data collection across time, but a lot of it was piecemeal or was a number of years old. So this was really updating the information, particularly after the COVID pandemic. It was really trying to show the real societal harms that the issues around period inequity can cause, and therefore why we need to take this cross-cutting action to make period equity a reality. And also based on the nature of what you've heard about In-Kind Direct's work and the way that we work, we really wanted to show the specific role of local charities for enabling that access to products, support and information, and really make sure that that work is championed and supported. So really, I think I just want to recognise an amazing advisory group who've worked with us. There's a number of period equity specialist charities, a number of our network partners, our long-standing corporate partner, Essity, our key partner, iRise International, there at the top, and also academics and those with lived experience. And I just want to say a personal thank you for, I don't think I've ever worked with a group of such empathetic, knowledgeable and kind people who have really pushed to make this report a reality. So it's been an absolute pleasure to work with them. And so I'm just going to pause there and we will move across to hearing from Neelam, who is the founder of Sisters, who's going to talk to us about some of the experience she hears around period inequity. So thanks, Neelam.
Hello, everyone. Firstly, thank you so much for inviting us to speak today and having us be part of this advisory group and contributing to this report. It was quite transformational, and I'm sure many of you, once you get to read it, you'll have an understanding as to why. As an organisation, we're quite keen on making sure the most marginalised person in a room has the spotlight and is really captured within this experience. And with that in mind, some of the feedback that we had and some of the learnings that we've had through the last, I'd say, several years of doing this work on the ground is that period equity is usually rooted in the same sort of people. We usually see on the news the same type of people, or we're seeing that they're the most marginalized people, but we don't really hear the stories around it for those marginalized groups. We've been really fortunate to work with places of worship and faith-based organizations across firstly Birmingham and then slowly wider out. And some of the learnings around that is actually going down to a basic lack of education around what periods actually are, which for me came as quite a shock. Being from this community myself, I had almost an expectation that everyone had a basic understanding of what periods are. And what I actually realized is a lot of the understanding of what periods may look like in some of these communities are actually rooted in some of the wives' tales that are told through generations and through grandparents, etc. And that periods are really there for one purpose only, and that is for reproductive health and you know, having children. There's never a conversation around if there's anything that goes wrong with the period or problem periods. So that's why a lot of these communities take some time to then start getting help with these conditions, or actually being aware of the problem with the condition themselves. And you may see in some of the other reports around like things like fertility in periods that particularly like South Asian and Black and brown communities usually get help around problem periods when they're going through the reproductive fertility journey. The biggest reason for that is that's when they realize there's a problem, because fertility is placed on such a pedestal within these communities. So not about the individual or the individual's health, but actually the fertility aspect and that being on the pedestal. So for us, we realize that rather than just educating people and telling people what periods actually are, and it's bigger than just fertility, we almost had to re-educate people, and we really had to dismantle some of these harmful attitudes around fertility and having that on a pedestal, and also essentially the patriarchy and misogyny within these communities itself, which has been quite a hard task to do. And I can say safely that it's taken several years for even things like some places of worship to even have menstrual products in their places of worship alongside things like sanitary bins, because it wasn't seen as something that was needed. So you can understand from this perspective, for us to even battle to have things like menstrual products, sanitary bins in toilets themselves, that was quite a big win for us, but isn't a conversation that's echoed across these sort of big meetings, because it's seen as a really small win. But for communities that don't even have a conversation about periods, this was quite a big win for them. And for the women that needed them, also a big win for them too. The next thing is really to tackle this across, you know, all places of worship, and actually have these conversations in a way that everybody understands those cultural nuances around periods. We really struggled engaging a lot of audiences, and that's with us being predominantly a Black and brown led organisation led by volunteers in these communities, because a lot of these conversations are so shrouded in misconceptions that it was felt that some of these conversations were highly sexualized in nature, and that therefore we're almost asking and teaching girls to be sexually promiscuous by talking about periods. So you can imagine there's a very multi-layered approach that we've had to do with these communities, and talking about what periods actually are to, you know, sexual and reproductive health and how these things are linked. It's been quite a journey for us, if I'm honest. I still think in these communities there's a long way to go. So this is before we've even got to the stage of actually giving products out. We haven't really got to the stage where we've even started talking about menstrual products that are reusable. We did attempt a couple of months ago with some of the refugee organisations we work with, we gave out period pads and moon cups. And we were met with a lot of resistance, again, something that I didn't actually foresee, because we'd had these conversations, in my opinion, quite openly, but realised that actually, whilst we may have been having them openly, the community still haven't quite come on board with us. So we were met with quite a lot of resistance around reusable products, because a lot of people felt, especially with the moon cups, about the physical insertion of them, that it was, you know, dangerous or harmful. And in some cases, some people thought they shouldn't be inserting anything, and that was links to things like virginity myths, etc. So we have a really long way to go, and that's before we've even got to really the period conversation yet. So there's a lot of conversations around equity, And for us, true equity is everybody being in a place where they understand what periods are, they have the same access to those period products, but also the same privilege around talking about periods themselves generally, which is something that we've really struggled with. We have noticed with the change in things like social media that there are more and more Black and brown women coming forward talking about these things, which is slightly making it more socially acceptable. But again, in those places of worship, in those marginalized communities, it's still a conversation that people are trying to not speak about. It's seen as something that, particularly if you've got different conditions, so I myself, I've got PCOS, endometriosis, PMDD. Those of you with any of those conditions know that some of the treatment pathways may have things like contraceptive pills to help you manage periods. Trying to tell that to sort of these marginalized groups who only see contraceptive pills as a way of like preserving not having children is a really difficult conversation, because there's always a connotation right at the beginning that you are having sex and that is a bad thing unless you are married and having children for the purposes of reproduction. So it's a wider conversation than just the period itself and just period poverty itself. And so one of the reasons I'm so glad to be part of this report is actually we've got a space now to actually say this out wider and actually get support with this, because until we are all sort of speaking from the same hymn sheet, we're not going to move forward within this space, and there will be communities that continue to get left behind. So my hope from today is that some of you will come away with this, a different understanding, different level of intersectionality and understanding of how this affects different communities and what we can do going forward to support those communities, because you might not be the right people to help those communities, but we can help or connect you with the other people that would be able to help you in that, and we would be happy to do so. So yeah, that's a little bit about our findings here. If you've got any questions and want to talk about into some more of the nuances, then we're going to be here to chat to you all day.
Thank you so much, Neelam. That was so interesting, and just picking up on some of the themes you covered there, and an amazing amount you covered there in 8 minutes. I'm incredibly impressed. Is that real role of community-based support, the role of nuanced and sensitive education to enable those shame-free conversations. And I think what really resonates is that idea, as you said there, that period equity is not actually separate. It's about inclusivity. It's about equity in general. This is just one facet. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. And I know you're going to be chatting to us again later in the panel. So now I know we've got a phenomenal video has been recorded by a volunteer related to sisters, Tara, and Tara is actually on a train as we speak, so she has kindly pre-recorded a video sharing her own experiences of her menstrual conditions and the impact it has had on sport and school. So I'm going to hand to Celeste, who hopefully is going to seamlessly start the video so that we can hear from Tara.
Hi there, my name is Tara and I work with the Charity Sisters. I'm delighted to have been asked to participate today, but as you'll probably know, this segment is pre-recorded since University of Family Commitments means I am unable to attend in person. Throughout this little speech, I want to address my personal journey with endometriosis, but also my take-home points from the Period Equity Report. Firstly, when I read the report, it was not just a compilation of statistics, it's a reflection of the systemic inequalities that still persist within society. It confirms that progress in women's health has been made, albeit painstakingly slowly, but still such ingrained stigma and silence around menstruation is still puzzling when considering that it seems to be natural and physiological for women. Yet, despite its universality, the sheer extent of taboos surrounding menstruation only exacerbates profound inequalities to menstrual products, healthcare, and also education. My personal journey dealing with endometriosis is one that I wish no other young girl should have to go through, but unfortunately many still do. From the age of 12, I suffered from menorrhagia to the point where it caused iron deficiency anemia. But as stated in the equity report, I actually had to learn more about menstrual cycles from very close family than anybody else, which includes healthcare professionals. When I did visit the doctor around 15, I was met with total disregard of how much symptoms like headache, hot flushes, cramping, and nausea were actually having on daily life. And the very blunt reply that I got was something like a hysterectomy would cure me of these symptoms. And all I remember was hurriedly walking out the door and leaving. But the harsh reality remains that too many women actually still get told this, or possibly even worse. And all this does is it actually just destroys self-confidence and adds to the lag time before a diagnosis is only first considered, not even confirmed. And this all adds up to the fact that endometriosis is not just a medical condition. It's something that can get in the way of dreams. It's a relentless assailant that can come at any time. And it's a condition that affects millions of women worldwide, yet its impact is often overlooked or even trivialized. I was an athlete when I was in my teenage years. I had good opportunities and I was making good progress. I lived and breathed swimming, training about 20 hours a week. But it was just out of nowhere, the endometriosis suddenly just swept into my life. The excruciating pain, debilitating fatigue, and the relentless daily battles, physically and psychologically, became new reality for me. And at first I tried to push through it. None of the other girls who I was training with ever complained about their menstrual cycles like I did. And so I refused to initially let the pain dictate destiny, but as weeks turned to months and it all came to a head, the toll on mind and body became too great. Training sessions felt just like the depths of hell, and competitions just weren't even about competitions anymore. It wasn't even about getting personal best. It was just trying to make it to the end of a long day in one piece. And every lap felt like there was something holding me back. And that's not even to mention the embarrassment of stepping out of the pool and having blood trickling down your leg. And it got to the point where these crippling symptoms pushed me to walk away from the sport, which was a real heartbreaking moment for me when I had put in countless dedication and hours and the amount of sacrifices that my parents had made to support me. It wasn't necessarily about giving up swimming, but it was about letting go of a part of me that has been cherished and cultivated for so many years. And this reinforces a lot that women's health as a discipline is much more about elaborate clinical descriptions. We can say that pain is like a stabbing pain, or it feels like a firework, or it feels like a boxing glove, or it feels like a stitch, or it feels like barbed wire. But actually, when you look within the scientific literature, molecular mechanisms are so much more sparse. And a prime example is that endometriosis, as we understand it, it forms scar tissue. That's fine. But could it be localized to the reproductive cavity? Could it spread to the bowel? Could it spread to the lungs? We don't know. We don't know if it's genetic. We don't know if it's autoimmune. And we don't know any of these big scientific questions that really can make the difference into reassuring patients. Even for diseases like PCOS, the general consensus has now shifted to prescribing metformin, commonly used to actually treat a proportion of diabetic patients. And actually, doing some research into this, metformin is labeled as an off-label drug, which means that it's prescribed to be used in a different way than stated in license. And this is a damning reflection of just how much pure female anatomy and physiology we don't actually understand. So that means that our care tends to be a lot of guesswork, which is seemingly deemed enough. And this all brings to a head that the period state equity report serves as a wake-up call. It reveals the stark disparities that exist between individuals who menstruate. It also shows there's inadequate facilities for managing menstruation hygienically, and also highlights the economic burden imposed by the high cost of menstrual products. The report also highlights intersectionality of menstrual equity with other forms of inequality, so like gender, race, and socioeconomic status. And it exposes how marginalized communities, including women of color, those who are on low income, potentially even homelessness, actually are the most vulnerable to experiencing the brunt of these inequities. Coming back to sort of my personal journey, it may have taken away my swimming career, but it never took away my resilience and the determination to try and rise above all these horrible symptoms. And I think it made me realize that nobody who suffers from any of these diseases is defined by what you lose, but actually what you gain. You gain a lot of empathy for those who are also battling these invisible illnesses, and a newfound appreciation for the simple things if you're surrounded by the right people. And also, you all have the collective goal to raise awareness and fight for better treatments and better diagnostics for those who are affected. But that adds to the question of, why should we care? Well, we should care because it's a priority for policymakers, advocates, and general society. Menstrual equity is a matter of pure human dignity, and it's heartbreaking to see that so many women around my age, possibly older than me, possibly younger than me, they might have to choose between buying food or menstrual products. And the worst thing is that nobody should ever have to miss school, work, or not reach career aspirations just because they can't afford necessities for menstrual health. And so menstrual equity is about ensuring that everybody has the right to manage menstruation safely and hygienically. But this is also crucial for public health. Lack of access to products, it facilitates quite adverse health outcomes and could lead to some very nasty infections. So by ensuring universal access, we can promote better health, equality, and outcomes for individuals. And this rallies up to the final fact that we should advocate for policy change at the local, state, and national levels. There's got to be changes in legislation that promote menstrual equity, including measures to provide free menstrual products, improve menstruation hygiene facilities, and address the absolute root causes of inequity. And therefore, the Period State Equity Report is a call to action. It's a testament to the power of data that can drive change and inspire action. And I hope collectively everyone works towards a future where menstruation is no longer a barrier to education, health, or dignity.
Wow, that's a really powerful video from Tara, who's covered so much there as well. And I think what Tara really brings to the fore there is sadly those myths that persist that really need dispelling. People need to be met with compassion and understanding, and that's not just at their GP or the local hospital. It's at work, it's at school, it's with friends and family, and that's what we've really tried to cover with the piece of work that we're publishing and sharing with you today, because the impact isn't just about physical health, it's about well-being and mental health. And I think, as Tara summed up there, the ability just to live life as you want to. So on that note, I'm delighted to pass to Celeste, our Policy and Research Manager, who's going to take you through some of the key findings from the research.
Thanks, Charlotte. So just bring the slides back up. Let's take us through. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Celeste. I'm, as Charlotte said, Policy and Research Manager at In-Kind Direct. And I'll just be giving an overview of the report methodology, findings and recommendations. So how we delivered the research, so Charlotte said right at the beginning, we sought to address some data gaps. So we commissioned Savanta to conduct 2 surveys. This included a nationally representative omnibus of over 2,100 adults in the UK aged 16 and over, as well as a survey of almost 3,000 adults in the UK aged 16 and over who indicated that they either currently experience periods or that they don't currently menstruate but may do so again in the future. And similar to the first one, the sample for the second survey was weighted to be representative of the population that experienced menstruation in the UK. We also interviewed employees from charity and business and those with lived experience of period inequity, and the report also includes insights from In-Kind Direct's network of over 6,000 charitable organisations. So altogether, these form the basis of the data and insights included in the report. So if you've had a chance to look at the report already, there are different sections in the report, and the first of which focuses on access to essential products. So we know that an understanding of the different types of period products and giving people with periods the choice of products at different times in their cycle and life is a defining feature of period equity, as Charlotte said right at the beginning. And we also know that the value of having the right product at the right time is not just financial. It has an impact on wider well-being and a person's ability to engage with education and work without embarrassment or worry. So what did we find out about access to these essential products? Well, we found that too many are going without, with 1.4 million people having gone without period products in the past year, and more than 40% of our network supporting someone who regularly uses toilet roll instead of period pads because they can't access the products they need. Thinking about who is going without, we found that people in low-income households or those receiving universal credit were more likely to go without period products. Black and Black British people were significantly more likely to have gone without period products at some point in childhood or adolescence when compared with white people, and almost half of those with a disability have gone without period products. In our interviews, we also spoke with women who had come to the UK seeking asylum, a group that we know is significantly affected by hygiene and period poverty due to a lack of recourse to public funds. They sadly described financial, practical, and language barriers to getting the products they needed. And when product was provided by accommodation providers, it was often done so in a stigmatizing way, and it was challenging to get the right type and absorbency of product for their needs. We also found that there are generational cycles of going without. So nearly 1 in 5 people who went without period products in childhood said they had also gone without in adulthood, which we know mirrors wider poverty. Being able to concentrate and feel comfortable at school has a significant impact on attainment and reducing absenteeism, which therefore increases life chances for employment and financial security. So accessible product provision will not by itself create period equity, but it can help stop these cycles before they start. As well as the findings from our research, our report also pulls out examples of good practice. So some of you will know that Scotland is the first country in the world to protect in law the right to access free period products, with councils and education providers being legally required to make products available free of charge to anyone who needs them. So our research found that nearly 1 in 4 who had gone without period products said they went without because they were too embarrassed to ask or that they didn't know where to access products for free. So this just demonstrates the need for that increased resource to enable local trusted services to signpost to other support. It's really crucial that we learn from existing schemes, such as what's going on in Scotland, such as the Department for Education's period product scheme in schools, to understand how those types of provision are working and how we can get that working for everyone. Being forced to go without essential products has a profound impact on well-being and people's ability to manage their period with dignity. Through our work, and as you can see through the quote on the slide, we see the impact that providing essential product has. Expanding access to free products was consistently spoken about in our research as a transformative step towards lifting the burden of period inequity. Moving on to the next section of the report, which looks at the importance of education and peer support. We know that comprehensive period education helps break down stigma and empowers people to make informed choices about their health and well-being. But we found that period education in school leaves gaps in knowledge that are filled by friends and family. So 1 in 10 who have periods never learned about periods in their education. And of those who did, only 39% said it left them feeling prepared for their first period, with the majority saying that they had to learn more about periods since receiving that education. So we know that period education in school has become a bit more common recently, with sort of statutory guidance on relationship, sex and health education coming into force in England, for example. However, for those who learned about periods in education, a minority said that they were taught about reusable products, menstrual health conditions and how to recognise them, as well as stigma and attitudes towards periods. Despite the recent improvements in education in school, we know that older people are less likely to have learned about periods in school, college or university. And if we think about the stat on that slide, that 70% of people who have periods say what they know about periods they mainly learned from female family and friends, this generational gap is critical. It means that those providing education and support may themselves have gaps in knowledge of menstrual health, different types of products and where to access support. Gender also matters. We found that only 30% of men in the UK learned about menstruation in education, and just under half say they're confident that they understand periods and the menstrual cycle. Thinking about data, which shows that over 60% of HR leaders are male, and other research which finds that most girls say that male teachers and classmates don't understand period inequality, it's really important that all genders are educated about menstruation to foster empathy and understanding. Thinking about Tara's experiences that she mentioned around sort of what she felt was normal and what sort of other people were experiencing, only a third of those who received period education in school said it left them confident in identifying what is a cause for concern with their period. And only half of people who have periods say they feel confident managing theirs. I think all of us on the call know that the third sector plays an important role in providing period products, education and advice outside of schools to ensure everyone has the knowledge and confidence they need. And the use of peer support approaches can help tackle stigma and increase uptake and accessibility of existing programmes, as you can see on the quotes on the slide there. A lack of education can lead to a lack of preparedness, perpetuating stigma and affecting physical and emotional well-being. And our interviews reinforce that the importance of period education at all ages. Closely linked to education is period stigma and support. Sadly, we found that stigma around periods is still prevalent, encouraging shame, embarrassment, and anxiety. 1 in 10 people have been told not to speak about their period in front of others, rising to 1 in 5 for people who are Asian or Asian British. And 38% of people who have periods have felt stressed or anxious because of their period, with 17% feeling recently embarrassed or ashamed because of their period, again rising to 24% for those aged 16 to 24. Thinking about gender again, fewer than half of men say they would feel comfortable speaking about periods with a friend or family member. Despite this, most people said they do have someone they would feel comfortable asking for help with their period. However, only 37% are confident they could go to their GP with concerns about their mental health and be taken seriously. This is not only incredibly worrying, but also increases reliance on other sources of support, such as community organisations and informal networks. So it's really vital that community organisations are given the funding and resources they need, and all of us receive comprehensive education. So if we are one of those trusted people that someone feels comfortable asking for help with, we're able to provide a bit of support. We'd also like to see the Women's Health Strategy in England continuing to improve information and support for women suffering from painful heavy periods and endometriosis. And it's crucial that stigma is tackled because it's holding people back and can be a barrier to reaching out for support. Our research also found that 43% of people who have periods have avoided certain activities because of their period, and some people feel the need to hide that they have their period from others or would not feel comfortable talking about periods with family. We hear from our charitable network how products act as a gateway to accessing a wider range of support without shame. So reducing that stigma is really important, and supporting people with their period can open up conversations to other support around health, financial security, and accessing other services. Now, thinking about sort of some good practice examples that we've pulled up for this section of the report, we are going to hear from Emily, founder of iRise International, in a moment, but one of the examples we pulled out is their Every Period Counts movement, which calls for shame-free access to period products, information, and support for all students. And we can see a quote on the slide there of someone speaking to their experience growing up in a minority background and how they've taken it upon themselves to open the conversation around periods. And I'll just pause so you can have a little read. So if we haven't managed to convince you yet of the need for action to achieve period equity, let's take a look at the cost. So we found that millions are being held back at work by their periods, costing 3.25 billion in days of work lost due to period inequity. So we found that worrying about leaking or feeling too embarrassed to ask for help holds people back from getting an education or being their best at work, with more than half of people who have periods saying they miss work or school because of it, and 70% feeling limited in the amount or type of work they could do because of their period. Now, this is because of symptoms like heavy flow, period pain, mental health, menstrual health conditions, feeling ashamed or embarrassed, but also not having the right facilities or product to manage a period. And in fact, going without period products or having a diagnosed menstrual health condition means an extra day of learning and work missed each month. Thinking about the workplace, periods can sometimes be overlooked by employers, but having policies in place that are openly communicated to employees, as well as supported managers and colleagues, can help reduce stigma or embarrassment. In our research, people with more supportive workplaces told us they found it easier to manage their menstrual health and well-being, but that work still needs to be done, as only a minority felt that they could openly talk about periods at work, a minority had access to free period products at work, and a minority felt that their employer supported time off for menstrual health. Being held back in the workplace starts from adolescence. So recent research found that more than half of girls in the UK have missed school due to their period, and the reasons for doing so sort of mirror what we found in the workplace. So not only can more supportive workplaces help ensure no one is held back by a period at work, if we look to the other parts of the report around investment in education and product provision in schools and communities, we can help stop these cycles of exclusion before they start. And longer term, it will help to ensure that trusted adults like teachers, healthcare providers, colleagues, and managers are ambassadors for period equity. Again, thinking about some good practice, so Bloody Good Period have developed a programme called Bloody Good Employers to ensure fairer, safer workplaces for all people who menstruate. And they provide guidance on sort of shifting to a more inclusive culture, having that open communication and those inclusive policies as well. And you can see the importance of those initiatives in the quote on the slide there. So throughout the report, we've tried to make the link between the overall sort of mental and physical well-being to specific interventions such as access to products, removing shame and stigma, and increasing universal understanding of periods. While we sadly found the cycles of exclusion which start at school and continue into the workplace, we do believe that this is preventable, and lifting it is really important to make sure everyone has the essentials they need to thrive in society. So we've demonstrated through the data and the stories shared with us the cost of not getting it right. And in the recommendation section of the report, we demonstrate how everyone has a role to play in achieving period equity. So we've made a number of recommendations for policymakers, businesses, and the third sector, focused on increasing shame-free access to the right products, support, and education for all, and increasing local delivery of nuanced, culturally sensitive services, as Neelam was describing. And we're really keen to work collaboratively with you all to take these recommendations forward. So please do get in touch with us if you are working in the period equity space. And I know we have some time at the end to share some next steps with you, but there's one action that we can all take away from today and implement into our daily lives by opening up the conversation, breaking down stigma, and talking about periods with friends, family, and colleagues. So thank you. I'll hand back over to Charlotte.
Brilliant. Thank you, Celeste. Wow, that was a phenomenal presentation. I also want to give a shout out to Katie, who is the other member of the policy and research team, who is keeping herself firmly off camera and behind the scenes, but has done a phenomenal job on all of the data analysis that's gone into the report. And I want to reassure anyone that's watching now, there is no quiz. We won't be checking that you pay attention. We would just say there is a wealth of information, including what Celeste has shared in the full report. So please go across to our website, inkinddirect.org, and have a look at the report and the free resources that are available there. But for now, I'm going to pass to Gareth, who is the Communications Director for one of our longest standing partners, Essity, and he works across the UK and Republic of Ireland, and he's going to share with us a bit about our working relationship, the importance of the research to Essity, and some of his own personal thoughts. So handing to Gareth.
Thanks, Charlotte. Hi, everybody. It's really great to see so many on the call today. So my name's Gareth Lucy, and I'm the Communications Director for Essity in the UK and Ireland. For those of you that aren't familiar with Essity, we're a global hygiene and health company. You're probably more familiar with some of our brands. So in the UK, you might know the Bodyform brand, and you might know the Modibody brand. If you're based in the US, we have a brand over there called NYX. And throughout Europe, we have different period product brands, including Libresse and Nana. So we're really proud of our relationship with Inkind Direct. We've been working together for the best part of 20 years. In fact, I think the first time we started working together was actually 2002, when we started donating various hygiene products to their network of charity partners. But really, our partnership began to progress significantly in 2017, which is when we first started working together to try and tackle period poverty. So I think it was June 2017. And I remember being sat in the office and reading this news story, and it was all over the news that day. And it was about schoolgirls in Leeds, and they were missing school because they either couldn't access period products, or they were using alternatives, so things like pairs of socks or toilet rolls instead. I remember being sat there and reading this, and then I vividly remember the brand manager for our Bodyform brand at the time coming over to chat to me, and she'd read the same article, or she'd heard it on the radio driving in that day. And it was really the first time that the term period poverty started to become something that was in certainly in our consciousness, but I think in the public consciousness as well. I mean, of course, it had existed before then, but I think naively people had just not really put it together that it was a thing, and that it was such a major issue within the country. So we started talking a little bit, and I think both of us felt immediately that we had a bit of a sense of responsibility to react and to do something. And we came up with this proposal, which we really quickly put through. And the idea was that we could make a formal commitment to In-Kind Direct to donate 100,000 body form pads per month, and at least start to provide a resource for those that were most in need. Before that, we had always donated product, but it had been surplus. So it had been ad hoc donations here and there. And our idea really was that for the first time, we would make this formal commitment and commit to a certain amount of product. So initially, it was a 3-year commitment. But what happened was during those next few years, we as a company, we started to research period poverty, started to really understand more about it, not just the scale of it, but the consequences of it too, and the impact that it has on people's lives. You know, from education to work, but also the physical and mental health impact too. So 3 years kind of went really quick, and 2020 rolled around very, very quickly indeed. And I can tell you that there was absolutely no hesitation on our side to stop the commitment after 3 years. So we carried on, and haven't stopped since. And I should say at this point as well that commitment of 100,000 pads per month is an absolute minimum. So if you do the math, it works out at 1.2 million pads a year. But actually, in reality, last year in 2023, I think we donated close to 2.5 million. So it is a minimum commitment from our side. And what we've started doing in addition to that initial commitment is expanding that to our reusable period underwear products, but also being involved in commercial opportunities too. So where we might sell direct to consumers, and we do a buy one, give one mechanic, and then also through retail partners like Tesco as well. So it's something that I'm deeply passionate about and invested in, and I'm saying that personally, but I'm also saying that on behalf of Essity and our brands. It's really important to us. We have a responsibility to care for the communities and societies where we live and work, and I'm really grateful that I work somewhere that I get to do that, and we take that sort of responsibility really seriously. But of course, we're talking about the report today, and I think something that's really important to highlight is that donating products only ever really papers over the cracks temporarily. We're more than happy to keep doing it, and we will keep doing it. But in order to bring about real change, we have to identify and we have to solve the root causes of the problems. And that's where this report comes in, because it highlights those root causes and it makes the recommendations towards the solutions for them. So from Essity's perspective, that's why this relationship and this report is really important to us. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about why it's important to me personally as well. I'm going to apologise in advance now for some potential oversharing. But a few years ago, my wife suffered with extremely painful periods. So when I say painful, I'm talking waking up in the middle of the night and me borderline calling for an ambulance on several occasions, because she's waking up screaming in agony. It really was awful for her. And at around the same time, we were hoping to start a family. So without going into too much detail, we weren't having much luck. It wasn't happening. And we'd never really put 2 and 2 together, really, that the two might be connected. My wife had gone to appointments. She'd gone and got painkillers, all the usual things to try and manage, and not really hadn't gotten anywhere at all. And as I say, this continued for the best part of 3 years before finally my wife got a diagnosis for endometriosis. And being totally honest, neither of us had even heard of it. We didn't know what it was, didn't really understand the impact of it at that point. But finally, after the diagnosis, we were able to get some treatment. I'm absolutely no medical expert, but my understanding is that they were able to effectively burn away the endometriosis through a procedure, and this finally stopped the really painful periods that my wife was experiencing. And soon after that, we were successful in getting pregnant. So we had a little girl who was born via IVF, and she turns 7 later this year. And that really brings me to the second reason why this is also very important to me personally. As a father to a daughter, I want to do everything I can possibly to ensure period inequity is no longer a thing. That it isn't something that my little girl has to worry about when she grows up. I want her to have the information and the education she needs. I want her to go into the workplace, or depending on what she wants to do in the world of work. But if it is in a workplace, then I want her to feel supported, safe, never embarrassed, and never ever ashamed. So this report is really just the start of that. We know the scale of the problem. We believe we've made the right recommendations to bring about change. And so now the work begins. Now we have to come together again. We have to work towards making those changes a reality. I'm 100% in, and I say that again personally and professionally on behalf of ST2. And so we look forward to really kind of driving change now, going forward in the next few years. Well, that's everything I wanted to share, and I'll hand back to Charlotte. But thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gareth. Really appreciate you taking the time to share, as you say, not just Essity and the work that's happening there at a corporate level, but also your personal connection to the work we've been doing. And I've had the pleasure of meeting your daughter on video calls. And I think we're delighted she's got a dad that's going to make sure she feels safe and not embarrassed as she grows up and goes into school and the workplace as well. So thank you so much. And now I'm going to pass to Emily, who has been one of our key charity partners at iRise International. Emily is a freelance social change consultant, and she's the founder and former CEO of iRise. So Emily, over to you.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. So just a little bit about iRise first. So we're an NGO working towards a world where no one is held back by their period. And we spent the last decade really trying to grow the global movement to end period poverty, shame and inequity. And I think we've learned along the way that we can only really achieve that kind of sustainable change when we come together across divides and across different sectors to act together for change. And that's why we're so excited to be part of this really groundbreaking research. And we just particularly want to thank InKind Direct for using their unique positioning to really convene a very diverse group of stakeholders. And also for the attention that they've paid throughout the process to combining lived experience with technical expertise. And I think that we feel that really uniquely positions this report to create change. And also personally, just a thank you to Charlotte for her kind and thoughtful leadership throughout the process, and sort of enabling all these different pieces to come together. But I just wanted to take a little step back and think a little bit about equity and what we might mean by equity and why and how that matters. So my 6-year-old daughter sometimes struggles with equity. She wants to know why her friend, who's autistic, gets to go into the classroom 20 minutes early before she does, gets to settle in the quiet corner while she waits impatiently outside. She wants to know why some of the children in her class get their reading books printed on green paper to help with their tired eyes. She moans about how unfair it is when her Muslim friends get the day off for Eid and come back with stories of exciting parties and presents. And sometimes she's envious of her classmates who get to be class counsellor and meet important school visitors. And I think when children are very young, we teach them that fairness means treating everyone the same. Everyone gets their turn, everyone gets one sweet, and so on. And I think there are some people who grow up believing that equal treatment is fair. However, many people, like my daughter, soon realise that we're all different and we need different accommodations and different opportunities to thrive. And the idea that we need to treat people differently to achieve a fair society is at the heart of what equity means. And I think what we're perhaps slower to realise is what this means for our idea of fairness or justice itself. So justice is about people getting their due.
And we all know the iconic image of a blind, beautiful justice handing out fair judgment. But if we believe in equity, then justice actually looks very different. She's not blind, but she has her eyes wide open, actively seeking to understand the people before her and their unique needs. And we can't deliver justice from a pedestal. Instead, we have to roll up our sleeves and get deeply embedded in the communities that we're trying to support. And I think the challenge with the menstrual cycle is that the needs it creates have been overlooked by these traditional ideas of equality and this very kind of blanket idea of justice that goes with them. And we have to recognise that those who experience menstruation have intrinsically different needs to those who don't. And if our fundamental worldview doesn't accommodate this, then we create unnecessary disadvantage and suffering on a really grand scale. And I think the most shocking statistic from this new report is the stat about the cost to the UK economy. So actually our failure to adequately support periods in the workplace is costing us, the UK economy, 3.25 billion a year. And that means that our oversights not only hold those people most affected back, but they're effectively handicapping the whole of our society. And I've always really liked Amartya Sen's thinking on justice and equity. So he says that we all have an innate desire to end injustice, and that when we're faced with practical situations of injustice that we have the power to address, then we will. That we'll work together, we'll bridge divides, and we'll find a way to act and remove that injustice. And I think this report creates that kind of opportunity for the UK on the issue of period equity. You know, it's the largest review of period equity in the UK to date, and it lays out in really stark detail an easily preventable injustice, and then sets out a set of recommendations or a path for how we can all take practical action to end it. And actually, the UK already has a really strong track record of taking action on this issue. We have free period product schemes in all the nations of the UK. VAT has been scrapped on pads, tampons, and more recently, period pants. Our RSE curriculum in schools now includes teaching on menstrual health. And last year, the British Standards Institute introduced a groundbreaking standard for menstruation and menopause in UK workplaces. However, this new data shows that there are additional barriers that we need to overcome, and there are other steps we need to take to really realise the full impact of all this fantastic work. I think in particular, menstruation is a cross-cutting issue, and we need to make sure that interventions are not overly simplistic or siloed, but that we're actually delivering holistic support and that we're integrating periods into multiple policy areas with lots of opportunities like this for cross-sector learning and regular review. You know, and I'd love to see the national government playing a more active role in convening this space again and making sure that we're having ongoing cycles of learning for existing interventions and policies. And I think it's just really important to say that this whole area is a relatively new thing for practitioners and policymakers, and we shouldn't expect to get the policies and interventions right straight away. And I know when we first looked at the data from this report, it can be a bit discouraging after so many years of work. But on the other hand, it also shows kind of how far we've come and how actually we're now kind of in the phase of really doing that hard work of partnering with communities to refine initiatives and get them working for everyone. So that's really exciting. And I think we just need to really focus now on bridging that gap between the rhetoric and the kind of commitments that we make in these kind of spaces and the reality for people on the ground. And this report is an invitation for us all to do just that. It's an invitation for businesses, charities, government and communities to really come together and consolidate and accelerate the action that we already have. And I do believe it's possible to eliminate period inequity in the UK within a decade if we can maintain and accelerate this kind of cross-sector collaboration and commitment to this issue. So my challenge is, let's use this report and the moment it creates to really recommit to that vision of a UK where no one is held back by lack of support for their period. That's it from me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Emily, and your incredibly kind words as well. I think you've really touched on something there, as you explained so eloquently, about equity and equality and fairness and how we have to move through those things. And I think you're absolutely right. This is a relatively new area. We are on a path, and I love that way you phrased it, of using this moment to recommit to getting to a point where no one is held back by their period. So thank you so much. I'm going to move us on now. We've got a bit of a panel discussion coming up, so would encourage anyone who's got any questions, either for Neelam or Emily, who've already heard from, and also going to introduce Caroline, one of our network partners at All Yours Period Box, who is also on the advisory group. If you've got any questions for anyone on the panel, please do pop them in the chat, and Katie will be keeping an eye and feeding any questions through to me. So Neelam, Emily, Caroline, if you're able to come off of camera off, I don't know what the technical term for turn your camera on is, would be lovely. And Caroline, I don't know if you wanted to quickly introduce yourself, because people have had a chance to hear from Neelam and Emily already.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. So my name's Caroline. I run an organisation called All Yours Period Box. We started in December 2020 with a very simple proposition of helping people access the period products that they need each month. So we distribute period products through community partners, so food banks, community larders. We're very proud of the network of libraries that we work with in our communities. And we also have a website where people can request products. And then off the back of this work, quite generically came about the opportunity for us to start getting involved with delivering period education into schools. And we now work with 4 local authorities in Wales. And we've also just received funding to start delivering period education into schools more locally where I live. So we feel very passionately, as Charlotte and Neelam and Emily will know, about especially around period education and how important that is, not only for our young people, but also adults in our local communities.
Brilliant. Thanks, Caroline. And that last piece, absolutely. It's not just about education in schools, as we saw in the findings that Celeste shared. If everyone is going to their trusted adult for information, then those adults need education as well. Okay, I'm going to kick us off with an initial question, and I'm going to come to you, Neelam, first, if that's okay. What are some examples of good practice of period equity that you've already seen in your work that people can perhaps take away today?
So I don't think this is a simple answer as if this is like a tick box approach and this is going to work. Obviously, we work with very marginalized communities, so really the best example of sort of period equity has been that journey of us and, you know, the partners we work with really being open to learning from us as experts in this space, and being open to challenging the cultural nuances that they're used to around period inequality. So I'll give you the example of places of worship who, for example, didn't have sanitary bins. I mean, most people in this room would think, well, nearly every toilet should have that, particularly if it's a woman's one. We won't get into the debate of where it should be in every toilet. But that took a really long time to get things like that in some of these places of worship, because they simply weren't seen to be important. And having those open dialogues of really open conversations and the need to have it in places of worship and the importance of it and actually how it's going to benefit the community is really a two-way approach. Now, this wasn't one conversation. This was a conversation over 3 years before we actually got a go-ahead from bins. So gives you an example of period equity at the very most grassroots level approach. And I think there's got to be an understanding things aren't going to change overnight. So for us, period equity is also putting time and resources into having those conversations at a grassroots level, so people can learn at their own pace, because some other communities might have this knowledge already, and we need to come to a place where we understand that not everyone has this sort of knowledge, and respect that and work with them on that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Neelam. And Caroline, would love to come to you with the same question. So some examples of good practice of period equity.
Yeah, I think Neelam's right. It's such a huge topic, and we work with community partners who are all doing their own little bit to try and make it better in their part of our community. And I think for me, springs to mind is one of our local youth centres near where I work, where they've kind of really embraced what we're trying to do. And now they have period products in all their toilets. So every gendered toilet, men and women, and their non-gendered toilets, which I think is fantastic. They've made our boxes available for people to take home without any questions asked. There's no barrier to access for those. But I think what really kind of lightens my spirit is the way the staff, both the males and the females, have kind of come to us and said, okay, these are the gaps in my knowledge, can you help me fill those? Because I want to make sure that I'm telling the young people that I work with, both boys and girls, you know, I want to give them that right information. And I just love that we're seeing groups of us, both in the communities that me and my teams work in, but also I'm sure Neelam and Emily and everyone else who's on the call that's involved in this kind of work, you know, we're making that change where we are. And we're hoping that people with more power than us, people in government, can see the change that we've made and realise that it is good practice and it is really positive examples of trying to make period equity a thing in our communities. So yeah, it's broad. I think there's lots of people who are doing some really good things. There's people who are working their way there. But for us, just when people engage and kind of say, these are my gaps, help me fill them, I just think that's brilliant.
Fantastic, thank you, Caroline. And something that's come through in both what you and Neelam have said is around that universal access. It's not just about in the women's bathroom, it's about for any person that has periods, regardless of which gender they identify with, but also about engaging men and boys, particularly in this as well, around product access and education. Emily, would love to come to you with the same question, some examples of good practice of period equity that you've seen already.
So I think the important thing is I think where interventions are equitable is where there's kind of that appreciation that the menstrual experience isn't one experience. So just like I was talking about the difference between equity and equality, you know, equality is everyone gets the same, and equity is we really understand people's needs and give them what they need to realise their potential. I think the best period equity interventions really take that approach on board, and I think we can often fall into a trap with period interventions of thinking, oh, everyone will have this one product or everyone needs this one approach. And I think, no, there's a big range of diversity within people's experiences of periods. And, you know, even thinking about, you know, we work with a lot of neuroatypical young people who have a very different experience from others. We work with young people with disability who, again, have unique needs. Gender diverse individuals will have, again, a whole different set of experiences. And so I think interventions that build into the kind of way it's delivered, a way of those, I suppose, direct those people shaping intervention as it's being delivered, that those are the most powerful kind of ways of doing it. And I think peer-led approaches are a really good example of that. And so where you're equipping low champions from particular groups or peers to kind of use their own experience to support others and make it, I think that can really help overcome this barrier that actually there is no one size fits all, and we need to be promoting choice, and we need to be trying to recognise that full range of experience in the kind of work that we're doing.
Brilliant, thanks, Emily. And so it sounds like there's a balance across all of what you three of you have shared is there's a piece around universal access, but also a very nuanced approach to what individuals need. And I think, Neelam, you made a point about moving at people's own pace. And I think a lot of people, few of you have touched on that co-production, peer-led approach rather than kind of very much a top-down, which I think comes through in the report as well. Thank you. I'm going to pick up on a question from the chat which has come through, and it touches a piece we've already kind of just very lightly touched on there around people who have periods who don't identify as female, and particularly thinking about education. Any thoughts on how we ensure that educational materials and resources about periods are inclusive and representative of all gender identities? And I'm going to see, Neelam, is there anything you wanted to come through on there, or feel free to pass it on to Caroline or Emily?
No, I think this is a really important question. It needs the space to talk about this. We quite often see at Sisters that communities can be completely erased from this conversation purely by just not having inclusive language. For us, it's not really that difficult to adapt language to be inclusive of all communities. Particularly, I'm South Asian, I'm Sikh, so from a religious and cultural perspective also isn't that difficult for us to do. Where we have come across struggles is actually people within the community itself not liking that, but as an organisation we've been steadfast and firm that this is our approach to inclusivity, and it doesn't take away anything from anyone else. In fact, if anything, if we are more inclusive, if we centre the most marginalised person in a room, regardless of gender identity, etc., we try and sort of go with the approach to like a Black trans person. If we centre those in the room, actually we raise the bar for everybody. So I do think this is a conversation, and I know I prick it up in quite a lot of meetings. I know even in this report is something that we picked up on quite a lot, is actually we need to be pushing this agenda and actually talking about this in the most inclusive way possible. So I think this is part of the journey too.
Fantastic, thank you, Neelam. And yeah, I'd absolutely reflect that. When you say, I really like that way of phrasing it, of raising the bar for everyone. And when I think about someone who does I identify as female, I have periods, it does me absolutely no disservice and causes me no discomfort to refer to people who have periods. So it does me no harm at all. But for someone who doesn't identify as female, they are suddenly included in a conversation that they would otherwise have been actively excluded from. Emily, I don't know if you wanted to come in with any thoughts there around educational materials and supporting those who maybe don't identify as female.
So I guess I think I would just add that I think we've always had a strong principle of being led by the people we support as well. So I think, for example, if we often use in a particular project, we'll centre the people that project's for, and we'll use the language that they want us to use. And I think there's scope for that as well, in terms of like actually being led by a particular audience and a particular group, and letting them, rather than us taking it upon ourselves necessarily to solve some of these complexities in isolation, actually doing it in partnership with particular groups can be really, really powerful. And actually, you know, we've had simultaneous projects where we've used slightly different language in different contexts based on the needs of that particular group of young people and their preferences. And I know a lot of groups working with quite diverse groups that kind of do use that in their approach as well. So I think that can be a very practical, I suppose, very practical thing of when you've got a room full of very different people, actually involving everybody and deciding what the ground rules are and how things are going to be talked about can be really, really powerful and can share that power. So it's not a group of more powerful people making these decisions as well. And in terms of resources, I mean, there's a growing number of really good resources out there. Yeah, I think definitely there's been massive progress, and so I think if people look, there are a growing number of kind of increasingly inclusive educational resources that can be used. I probably can't do a full list, but I'm happy to do it after.
Oh, Emily, I thought we were going to get a party trick from you there. Are you going to reel off some titles for us? I think I'd also add into that, I know quite a few of us who are on, I can see various lists of people who are on the call with us today, and people on the panel with me now have been part of conversations with the Department of Education who look at the guidance that surrounds the provision of products and education in schools. And there's certainly been a real openness to the language that is used in that guidance and that support to be as inclusive as possible, which I think we would all take as a massive step forward as well. I'm going to switch tack now. We've had a question that kind of relates to a couple of different things around sustainable and reusable products, and also thinking about, when I think one of the recommendations in the report is around thinking about periods in all policies, and you kind of hear as a phrase quite a lot about. I'd love to get your thoughts, and maybe Emily, I'll start with you around how kind of the pros and cons of thinking about periods as a distinct thing to cover with a policy versus it being incorporated into just all policies as a standard piece of kind of approaching equity. Is there anything you wanted to bring through there?
So I think, just to say that I think seeing things as a standalone issue is often a powerful stepping stone for very neglected kind of areas of work. You know, to sort of set them up in a standalone way helps to kind of accelerate a process of change. But I think if you're doing that, and that is a strategy, and I think for periods it has been a very clear strategy for the global movement, whether that's been conscious or not, I think the longer term goal needs to be integration, because actually you only achieve that kind of society-wide impact when you integrate. And I think for something like menstrual health, menstruation, where it is so cross-cutting, you know, it does need integration. So I think you need both, but I think you need them at different stages of that journey of change. And I think it is also really important to be ready to transition. So actually not to hang on to, you know, a lot of people can get very invested in their area of work, their issue, and actually to be ready to, as a movement and as a community, to kind of to integrate and to actually bring in much more a much wider community of stakeholders to create that kind of society wide change. But I think in the UK we're still very much at the point where some kind of central convening, some kind of identity for this issue is helpful. But I think probably there will come a point where it really is about pushing that integration as fully as possible.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emily. And I think that's a really eloquent way of putting it, this idea of when we talk about raising awareness of a particular issue, that does mean dealing with it in isolation to raise awareness of it, and then think about how you consolidate it into wider policy change. Makes a lot of sense. And Caroline, would love to come to you, whether you had any thoughts on the policy piece, or also if there's anything you wanted to share around reusable products, which we haven't really gone into specific product detail in the report, but we know that that's a real facet as well.
So just on the speaking to the policy piece, I think it's really important as well that we don't confuse periods with the whole menstrual cycle. So there's lots of conditions that are triggered as you go through your menstrual cycle. It's not always about how you bleed at the beginning of your cycle. So I think for us that's really important, is, you know, some of the education we do is around how your whole menstrual cycle impacts your day-to-day life. And so for me, it's about picking up all your menstrual health rather than just focusing on periods. But then talking about reusable products, we do a lot of work educating people as to how reusable products work, how to use them safely, to reuse them, and what kind of change that can have on your body over time, from going from traditional disposable products into kind of regularly using reusable products. And the enthusiasm and the excitement that can actually generate amongst young people is just a delight to see. So it's something that we think, you know, for All Yours, it's all about choice. So we would never advocate that someone has to use a reusable product, but we think it's really important that they have that information and they're not relying on what their mum's used, or, you know, kind of what their auntie used, or what their dad brings home from the supermarket because he doesn't really know what they use. So we just think it's really important that as trends change, as new products come on the market, we're keeping those people that we're sharing education with up to date on what those new choices might be.
Brilliant. Thank you, Caroline. And two really good reminders there about the underlying principle of choice. And a really good reminder this is about menstrual health in the broadest sense. And for those that have already shared particular conditions like endometriosis, PCOS, PMDD, it definitely isn't just the 4 or 5 days of the month that you're bleeding. So I think that's absolutely a fair point to make. I'm going to round us out with one last question for the panel, and really kind of get a sense of your hope for the future. So Neelam, we'll come to you first. If you could implement one of the recommendations in the report tomorrow, which one would it be and why?
I am still thinking on this question.
Shall I go to Caroline and give you a second? Caroline, come to you first.
So I think for me, it is involving the wider community in the conversation. I think we have to remind ourselves that we're very good at talking in an echo chamber sometimes. And, you know, even since this research came out last Thursday, I've already done 2 events, you know, kind of around International Women's Day. And you know, I've been out there and I've shared some of the stats and I've talked about some of the findings, and just the look on people's faces, it's just so nice to get it out there into the broader community where the change can actually start to happen. So as much as, you know, it's great that we have forums and platforms and places that we can talk about this, just getting out there and talking to people who don't realise it's a problem, that they don't realise that there's period inequity in the UK, that they think it's all a third world problem and we're, you know, kind of way beyond that. So just involving our community, and because we're a community-based project, for us, that's just, it was kind of a no-brainer for us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Caroline. I think that's so important. We've all got our soapboxes and our platforms, and we have to make sure we use them. Emily, I shall come to you next. What recommendation would you implement tomorrow from the report?
Can I do an idealistic one and a more pragmatic one? So
I'll
I
allow
think
it, yeah.
in a perfect world, I would love to see the government convene this space again. Like we used to have a period poverty task force before the pandemic, and I think we're just at a stage where there's so much learning happening, and there's a kind of missed opportunity to really bring that learning together, and also to really evaluate these quite innovative new policies that are being implemented. And I think, you know, it's not just learning for the UK. I think this learning would have global impact, and it upsets me to see that that learning kind of not be fully captured and utilized. But I think more pragmatically, I think really that it's the recommendations for business and for employers where I feel the most hopeful, and where I think we could achieve the most more quickly, because I think a lot of employers are so well positioned to impact, you know, thousands of people's lives on this issue through quite small changes. And I think we now have this really good workplace standard from the BSI, and I just think all the pieces are there. There's a lot of real will as well. I think, you know, we heard from Essity about their kind of deep commitment, and I just think that businesses are probably the most well positioned to really push things forward quickly. So that's my answer.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Emily. And Neelam, we'll circle back to you for your recommendation you'd implement tomorrow.
So I agree with Caroline from the point of view of involving communities, but there's a specific part in there which talks about sort of the cultural aspect and having that cultural nuance built into how we talk and deal with this sort of issue in schools, etc. And I think this needs to be a bit more expanded, because actually sometimes what we tend to see in the space is people that don't look like you teaching you about your own culture and those cultural nuances. So I think this also needs to reflect the people teaching it. You know, it needs to take a grassroots response. I think we need to devolute some of the funding into grassroots communities to upskill them, for them to do the work. We all might be great experts in this space on this call right now, but that doesn't mean we are the right people to deliver this work in those marginalized groups. And I think some of these recommendations for me is about ensuring that we are not taking or co-opting the space from other people who can do that better than us. I really think a lot of this work is passing the baton on and actually upskilling the next generation, the next lot of people to do this work, because we can't do this by ourselves. We talk a lot about, you know, we need a recommitment to period poverty, but if we are continuously the same people within the space, we're not going to see any changes. So for me, it's really about upskilling, educating the next person for them to upskill the next person after them. And I think that's the only way we're going to break free from some of the cycles around this conversation.
Brilliant, thank you. So just to round out there, we've had a really wide-ranging set of kind of hopes and dreams from the panel here around actively engaging communities, about passing on the baton, convening more space at a national and government level to have these conversations, and the really kind of relatively simple, quick steps that employers can take right now to affect thousands of people. And I think I just add into that mix, as we've said, there are some schools doing great stuff. There are some communities doing great stuff. There are some hospitals and GPs doing great stuff. There are some employers doing great stuff. What I would love to see is that universal approach, so that wherever you are in the UK, you can expect great stuff when it comes to period equity. And just to pick up on Neelam's point there, I'd completely echo, and it's pulled through in the report that today's students and today's young people are tomorrow's teachers, GPs, parents and employers. So absolutely getting it right early on, we know will make a huge difference now and in the future. So a massive thank you to Neelam, Caroline and Emily for joining that discussion. And I'm just going to round us out now as we come to the end of our session together. I think Jesse is going to share one last slide with some next steps we can all take away. So I think if we can just move on to the last slide. So I think what we're asking everyone to do is to head to our website, inkinddirect.org, have a read of the full report. Not only have we got the full report and recommendations there, we've also got some fab free resources you can have a look at to help anyone start a shame-free conversation today with a family member, a friend, a colleague, to start raising awareness and breaking down stigma. And if anything you've heard or seen, or when you've had a chance to read the full report, we'd love to pick up conversations with anyone who's interested in doing more. So please do get in touch with Celeste and Katie at research@inkinddirect.org. And just to round out a kind of general next steps, if you are a community organisation on the call today, you can register for free to join our charitable network, where you will be able to access products to get out to your community, thanks to the donations of companies, manufacturers and retailers like Essity. You can access those free resources, start the conversation, and you'll also see very strategically in the chat, Katie has just popped a link to an evaluation form for today's webinar, so we can keep learning. I just want to say a massive thank you to the entire advisory group, and particularly to Emily, Neelam, Caroline, Gareth and Celeste for presenting and sharing with us today. And thank you everyone, and we'll be putting the recording and the slides up on our website, I would imagine in the next week or so. Thank you everyone. Bye.